Texans quarterback C.J. Stroud has seen his average draft position climb 2 full rounds over the last 4 months. We're going to tell you why that is a huge mistake on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we're taking a look at some of the most surprising ADPs, courtesy of Dynasty League Football. We're going to look at some tight ends that have some curious ADPs. We're going to look at some running backs that we just thoroughly disagree with their average draft position right now. But I want to start at quarterback, Kate, because C.J. Stroud has seen his overall ADP go from 61 to 41 over the last 4 months. It's basically a 2 full-round rise. In Superflex leagues, he's up to the 4th overall player off the board. Do you agree with this massive rise for C.J. Stroud?
Here's the thing. I'm not trying to discount C.J. Stroud's rookie season. It was absolutely phenomenal. 4,100 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions. He was a very efficient passer, averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game as a rookie, which was made all the more impressive by the fact that there was pretty much no rushing upside to his game.
None.
Didn't even crack the 200 rushing yard mark. So that's what makes his overall performance just that much more impressive. But my biggest question is, what is accounting for this rise? Because his value has remained pretty steady. He's been in the QB4 to QB6 range for, I don't know, since the conclusion of the season when we look at average draft position. But the price of that QB4 is being drafted earlier and earlier and earlier. So, maybe 2 months ago when you were looking at, a player in, the 60 range, right? You might have been missing out on, I don't know, a Christian Kirk, right? Or, a Chris Godwin. Now, in order to draft CJ Stroud, you have to pass up on a Jonathan Brooks, a T Higgins, like a George Pickens. You need to pass up on some much higher quality players in order to draft CJ Stroud. I'm just wondering what accounts for that, because we've seen no rushing upside, right? And that's not like a surprise. That wasn't a part of his college game. And then I'm wondering how much of that hinges on Stephon Diggs, who is an aging wide receiver playing on a 1-year deal. What's with, tell me, I don't know.
Obviously, I think people are really excited about the Stephon Diggs addition. They're excited about Nico Collins signing a long-term deal. I think that does give them some stability at the wide receiver position. Tank Dell coming back for year 2. I think a lot of people believe that this is just going to be a really good offense, and that they see a really good offense with a 22-year-old quarterback. Draft that player high because you're going to get the next 15 years out of that quarterback. But one thing that Matt Williamson has taught us is don't overreact too much to the young quarterbacks because things change really quickly. And when I look at somebody like Lamar Jackson, who has now been surpassed by CJ Stroud, I don't get it. We've seen Lamar Jackson post the overall QB1 numbers.
The goal would be for CJ Stroud to become Lamar Jackson.
Exactly. And if you missed last week's show when we talked about the anatomy of the overall QB1, the rushing upside is almost, you need it now. You're just not going to be a QB1 or the QB1 without it. You need to be able to find a way to get to 500, 600 yards rushing and 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns at the bare minimum. And for as much as I love CJ Stroud and for as great as I think he is as a actual NFL quarterback, I just don't see that happening, which makes him a little bit of a reach as QB4 right now.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. And I mean, even Patrick Mahomes, right? Like we've seen rushing become kind of a element of his game over the past 4 seasons. He's averaged 359 rushing yards per season. Do I think CJ Stroud technically has the athleticism to achieve that mark? Absolutely. It's just a question of whether or not he's actually going to do that. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of surprising stats here about CJ Stroud. Okay. I want you to tell me, I want you to give me a shock rating. These are the players that finished with more fantasy points per dropback than CJ Stroud in 2024 or 2023. I want you to grade your shock level.
Okay. So let's say 1 not being shocked at all, and then 10 being absolutely floored.
Yes. Joe Flacco.
Well, no, I shouldn't because Flacco had you only played
Flacco,
5
yeah,
games.
he was absolutely ripping it.
Yeah.
How about Jake Browning of the Cincinnati Bengals?
That's surprising. Yeah, that's surprising.
Grade it.
I'm going to give that like a 8. It's pretty
Okay.
good.
Dak Prescott.
That's like a 3. That's not that surprising. We knew that Dak was really good.
Dak was,
last year.
Dak had an MVP season, so
Yeah.
that's fair. Justin Fields.
See, this is what we come back to the rushing upside, right,
Mhm.
Kate? Like if you can run the ball as a quarterback, your floor is going to be just so much higher. That's like a 4 for me.
Russell Wilson.
That's a 10. I guess I would never have expected.
To be fair, they tied. Both Russell Wilson and Joe Flacco tied CJ Stroud with 0.51 fantasy points per dropback. I'm going to leave you with one more bombshell. Brock Purdy.
That's not surprising. That's like a 2. Brock had unbelievable numbers last year. He was highly efficient.
And the year before.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
I'm just saying Brock Purdy was tied for second in the league, which is kind of crazy because leading the league was Josh Allen. Then we had Lamar Jackson, who was actually tied with Brock Purdy for fantasy points per dropback, which again, the rushing upside crazy. Then it was Jalen Hurts, and Justin Fields. Those were the players in the top 5. And 4 out of those 5 had a big time element of rushing in their game. So Brock Purdy being in the mix there, really impressive. But I just wanted to shed some light because obviously the passing efficiency is very important for CJ Stroud's game. But there were a lot of quarterbacks that I listed there that I can draft much, much later in my fantasy
and that's
drafts.
the point. I think CJ Stroud is going to be a stable quarterback year to year. I think he's going to put up very similar numbers. He's obviously going to be a long-term starter in the NFL, but if you're looking for quarterbacks that are actually going to make a difference in your fantasy leagues and your dynasty leagues, I think I would look elsewhere and I would avoid CJ Stroud at, picking him at 40th overall. Certainly when I can get a quarterback like Kyler Murray, who is going 30, 40, 50 spots later or an equivalent to that. So as much as we love CJ Stroud, he is being way overvalued right now in your dynasty leagues.
Yeah. And just to be clear, love CJ Stroud, but for CJ Stroud to return that kind of value, he is going to have to become the Patrick Mahomes equivalent, but even better as a passer, because as I mentioned, Patrick Mahomes does have some element of rushing to his game. He's had 300 plus rushing yards in each of the past 4 seasons. He's going to have to be a better passer than Patrick Mahomes.
What's crazy, Kate, even think of Patrick Mahomes, how great Patrick Mahomes is. He hasn't finished as a QB1 since 2018, I believe, right? Yeah. It's been a while. And we've had now multiple seasons where there's been multiple quarterbacks that have finished ahead of him in fantasy points per game. So just kind of keep that in perspective when you are drafting CJ Stroud.
I can't wait to see the comments here on YouTube, by the way. I can't wait.
We're prefacing this all by we think CJ Stroud's an amazing quarterback. So just putting that out there. All right, Kate, let's talk about some tight ends that have some very, very curious ADPs. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But unfortunately, we're getting to this slow time of the year. And with the playoffs winding down in the NHL, We get fewer and fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports mood going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long, whether you're looking at some Olympic odds. Obviously, we've got Major League Baseball all summer. We're inching closer to the NFL season, so it's coming. So head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are looking at the most surprising ADPs courtesy of Dynasty League Football in their June batch of ADP. And Kate, let's talk about the tight end position. Let's start with Dalton Kincaid, who has now seen his ADP fall in 4 straight months. He's down to tight end 6, and I don't understand it at all.
Make it make sense. So
I
we're
can't.
looking. I don't understand. You can't make it make sense because, I mean, you look at the meteoric rise of
Sure.
CJ Stroud. Yeah, that's a word. So you look at that rise in ADP, right? And for CJ Stroud, and a big part of that hinges on the arrival of Stephon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills, I think. So weirdly, you're looking at Dalton Kincaid, who now has all the targets in the world, and I think has a truly good chance to lead the Buffalo Bills in terms of targets and receptions in 2024. Thanks to the departure of Stephon Diggs, thanks to the departure of Gabe Davis, he was a good prospect, first round draft capital. We loved him coming out of college. So, like, why are we cooling on Dalton Kincaid now that he finally has the opportunity to realistically finish as the overall tight end 1?
I don't know, Kate. You're going to have to explain this one because I don't get it. If you look at Dalton Kincaid's numbers in the second half of the season against Sam Laporta's numbers, they're almost identical. The only difference is the touchdowns. And we know touchdowns can be a little fluky, right? Like some tight ends will have 10 touchdowns one year and the next they'll have 4. Like it's just not a very sticky stat. But I also think there's reasons to believe that Kincaid could get more work in this offense. And you mentioned it with Stephon Diggs leaving. We saw last year Dalton Kincaid coming into the draft, did nothing pre-draft as he was dealing with the back injury, didn't work out at the combine, didn't work out at his pro day, missed some of the offseason stuff with a back injury, and then comes into the year, plays okay. And then once Dawson Knox gets hurt, that's when he really took off. I kind of think he would have done that anyways as he was, getting fully healthy. Now he's healthy going into year 2. And this offense, I just think is going to look totally different with Joe Brady. I don't understand this at all. I can understand him being tight end 6 if the other tight ends were grouped very closely and you're talking about they're going between 1 and 2 spots differently. You know what I mean? Like they're going all the same round, but pick your flavor. That's not the case. Some of these tight ends are getting drafted a full round or 2 rounds ahead of Dalton Kincaid. I just don't understand it at all.
I mean, Trey McBride is being drafted as tight end 2 in like the very early 3rd rounds. Like, I mean, that difference in terms of ADP, being able to get Dalton Kincaid a full 2 rounds later, the fact that he's being drafted about a half a round behind Travis Kelce, who's age 34. And I think we all know that the Kansas City Chiefs are prioritizing keeping him healthy for another potential Super Bowl run. I don't really think they care as much about fantasy football as we do. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, just from a realistic standpoint, the Chiefs limit Kelsey's role throughout the regular season and keep him on the field for these critical downs, right? These crucial situations when they're down. But I think generally speaking, like every down Travis Kelce is probably a thing of the past unless it's the NFL playoffs. And for Dalton Kincaid to be drafted, honestly, I think the difference between him and Trey McBride is probably the most egregious difference for me. Like Dalton Kincaid, I thought was the better tight end prospect coming out. They're both 24 years old. I would say I think Trey McBride's chances to lead his respective offense in terms of total targets in receptions, receiving yards this year, much more limited now with the arrival of Marvin Harrison Jr. Like the Bills traded up to get Dalton Kincaid, and it wasn't because he's a great blocker. They went up to get him because he's a receiver, and that's what they drafted him to be.
I'm going to give you a very realistic scenario that's playing out in drafts right now. So let's assume in the 3rd round and the 5th round, you're looking at getting a tight end and a running back. Would you rather have Trey McBride in the 3rd round and then take, let's look at it here, and then take Rachaad White? So Trey McBride and Rachaad White, or Dalton Kincaid and Kyren Williams?
Dalton Kincaid and Kyren Williams, like all day.
Let me change the names. Would you rather have Saquon Barkley and Dalton Kincaid, or Trey McBride and, I don't know. Let's look at the Trey Benson.
Oh, that's hard because I love Trey Benson.
I know.
But yeah, I'm going to take Saquon Barkley, who's probably going to win me a championship. Like that pairing can win me a championship this year and the years to come.
Yep.
Easy.
Yeah. Let's look at another tight end. And this one's hard for me because I love Brock Bowers. I love Brock Bowers as a prospect. I'm on record pre-draft when you, Matt, and I were recording an episode about tight ends that I boldly said that Brock Bowers is my tight end 1 in this class. Not only in this class, but tight end 1 in Dynasty League football. And then he gets drafted by the Raiders, which is kind of the worst case scenario considering, like, if you're looking pre-draft, you're hoping that Brock Bowers goes to a good quarterback where there's targets open, right? Instead, he goes to arguably the worst quarterback situation in the league with Aiden O'Connell, who has now taken a shot on 2 consecutive episodes of the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. And he goes to an offense that already has Michael Mayer. They already have Devontae Adams. Jacoby Myers is a very competent receiver, but his ADP has actually gone up to tight end 3. Is that too high?
I'm kind of feeling like it is. And I was a person that came out in the post-draft process. And I said, like, maybe we're overthinking Michael Mayer and being a little bit too harsh about his landing spot. Because I still do think there's a realistic chance that, like, yeah, Michael Mayer, I think, is probably, a quote unquote more traditional inline tight end than they're going to utilize Brock Bowers. I don't think they plan to utilize Brock Bowers as heavily in that traditional tight end role, like use him more out of the slot, use him more as a true receiver, a la a Dalton Kincaid, right? So like I was, pretty vocal. I was like, maybe this isn't as bad as we think it is, but that doesn't mean it's good, right? Like it doesn't mean that you don't look at tight ends like Dalton Kincaid. I think Dalton Kincaid's just the most egregious name on the list. So I just keep bringing him up. But I mean, even
so is
Kyle
Pitts, by the way. I think Kyle Pitts is undervalued.
I think Kyle Pitts is undervalued as well. And I think you can easily make that argument. Kyle Pitts, 23 years old, obviously hasn't panned out. I don't know.
Here's what I keep coming back to, Kate. If you are in a dynasty startup, I don't want to be one of the first 3 teams to draft a tight end. In fact, I probably want to be like the 5th or 6th team to draft a tight end, because that means I'm going to get my choice of Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts, or
as long as I'm not in your draft, Marcus.
Right.
Yeah.
To me, there's no reason to be the 1st or 2nd one to pick. I still really like Brock Bowers. I think I could make a case that tight end 3 is where he should be valued, but I like Dalton Kincaid just as much as Brock Bowers, who's going significantly later. So that's what's really tricky about the whole tight end position in dynasty leagues right now. I want one of the top 7 players on my team. I think there's a pretty big drop off after the top 7. But the order between 1 through 7, like, would it shock you, Kate, if any of these tight ends finished as the overall tight end 1 this year?
No.
No. And that's kind of the point, right? Like any of these guys can finish as tight end 1. So don't overdraft them.
Yeah.
That's Brett Bauer's sad face. Maybe the Raiders will get like Dak Prescott next year in free agency, and this will all be nothing.
Oh my God, Dak Prescott's going to be a Raider.
I know, wouldn't that be so much fun?
That would be really good for his value, actually. I'm just saying.
It would be also really good for me, who covers the Raiders. I think that
we know Dak Prescott loves the tight end position. That might be the best thing for Michael Mayer's value. So here's to all of our Michael Mayer, shares and hoping.
All right, let's talk about some running backs now who have some very curious ADPs. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are looking at the latest batch of ADP, courtesy of Dynasty League Football. And now we've moved on to the running back position. Kate, you and I each have one running back that has an average draft position that makes absolutely no sense. Who do you got?
I'm going to keep harping on it, Marcus. If you've been a longtime listener of the Locked On Dynasty podcast, you know what the name I'm probably about to drop here. And it's Devin Achane, Miami Dolphins running back, who's being still drafted as RB9 in Dynasty startups. I've been on record that I thought the average draft position was egregious, but I thought we were going to start to see a drop, right? So Devin Achane had an incredibly efficient rookie season. One could almost say impossible to replicate that level of efficiency. It's 5'9", 188 pounds. Big concern for him coming out of college was the fact that he is so small. And obviously being fast, maybe you can avoid some of those hits. But when you get hit, how is your body going to be able to hold up? And guess what? If his rookie season told us anything, all those concerns were incredibly valid. Dude dealt with injuries all year, dealt with a nagging knee injury, missed time, came back, re-aggravated the injury, missed time again. And you know what we saw throughout the entire season? We saw Raheem Mostert, who I'm just going to say it, like the organization of the Miami Dolphins, they keep trying to tell us that Raheem Mostert is the RB1. Like, you literally had Mike McDaniel coming out in a press conference saying, look, we love our running back core. Like, we have an amazing group of running backs. And then he slides in, obviously led by Raheem. They give him a 2-year extension this offseason. They go into the draft. In round 4, they draft Jalen Wright, who literally is a bigger Devin Achane, right? Like, has the size, has the frame, but still has that top end speed. That's what he was known for coming out of Tennessee, drafted into one of the most perfect schemes. And they traded a future 3rd round pick to get him. So they were willing to say, like, we think the value is so good here for this player that we think he's going to be worth a 3rd round pick next year, right? They bring in Jalen Wright. Like, what am I missing? Because every single time I'm looking at the stats, I'm looking at the usage. Yeah, like Devin Achane seems like a guy that, you want him to get 10 touches per game, right? If you're the Miami Dolphins, you probably wish he could get more, but for the sake of his health, for the sake of his size, like, he's not going to be a goal line running back, right? We saw last year Raheem Mostert led the NFL in rushing touchdowns. And you know what? A big part of that was the fact that he was the primary running back utilized in the red zone. 47 red zone carries to Devin Achane's 23. Carries inside the 5. He had 20 of those carries. Devin Achane had 5. Do you think that gets any better now that we have Jalen Wright, who's a much bigger running back in the mix? Like, every single move the Miami Dolphins have made this offseason tells us that they are not going to feed Devin Achane a good amount of carries. So you know what? You need to rely solely on efficiency, but I'm just saying that level of efficiency, it can wane, depending on quality of opponent, depending on blocking schemes. Like, running backs are incredibly dependent on blocking schemes. I just don't understand when they're trying to tell us, like, why aren't we listening? And you cannot invest in Devin Achane as your RB1 when his own offense is telling you they are not invested in him as your RB1, he might win you a week, but at that cost, he's probably going to lose you more than he wins.
Can I make the pro A-Chain argument or no?
You can do your best, but
I'll be really quick about it. Raheem Mostert is 32. He's got a pretty lengthy injury history. Now, they did give him the contract extension.
Been pretty healthy the last 2 years, though.
Yeah, he has been. But, man, there is a shelf life for these running backs. Jalen Wright was a 4th-round running back for a reason because he has absolutely no vision. And I think it's going to take him a while to get up to the speed of the NFL. And we saw A-Chain last year. Listen, he's not going to be as efficient. It's impossible, right? Like he's going to regress to the mean at least some this season. But maybe there is some Jamal Charles to his game where he only needs 14, 15 touches to win you weeks. I think my issue is I agree with all the points that you made. My issue is you start getting to the running backs behind Achane, and there's not a ton that I like a lot more. And one of the ones that's directly behind Achane that makes me even more nervous is Rachaad White, who the Buccaneers drafted Bucky Irving. I've got some concerns with what their offense is going to look like in year 2 with a new offensive coordinator. Now, I do like Liam Cohen, the new OC there. But Rachaad White is a 25-year-old running back that I know the numbers were good last year. I wasn't blown away watching him on tape. I think for me, I would rather take the upside of HN, but I don't love either value.
I think both of these guys are screaming red flags. Now, again, you look at just in general, like you look at the number of touches Rachaad White got. I don't think, Bucky Irving necessarily a huge threat, but again, he's going to steal some touches. There's not a lot of competition there, but given the level of efficiency that Rachaad White has shown to this point in the pros, I don't necessarily like how many times are they going to say, let's keep feeding Rachaad White with this level of efficiency? There's a lot of upside, but if he didn't have the level of involvement that he did in the passing game, if you looked solely based on his rushing upside, there is none. And that's what is kind of scary. Yeah, both of these guys, I'm just out.
Well, I think this is the point, right? Like there are 7 or 8 running backs that we really like. And you better get those players early because then you're drafting running backs in that 9 to 20 range and you're surpassing or passing up really good wide receivers and tight ends. Like we just mentioned, like you could take Rachaad White or you could take Dalton Kincaid. And I would just much rather have Dalton Kincaid. So if you are in a dynasty startup, try to grab your 1 running back early, your 2 running backs early, and avoid that. What do you want to call it? The dead zone of running backs right now, Kate, because that's what it feels like to me. Like that, when I look at the ADP of running backs between 9 and forever, it's like, oh, I just want to avoid all these players entirely right now.
Yeah, it feels very much like I want to get my top guy, not a Devin Achane. I want to get my top guy, and then I just want to wait and just find some of these sleepers, right? Yep. Like that are, not necessarily you're heavily investing in, but might have a shot to lead their respective backfield either this year, next year, or so on and so forth.
That's like the Zamir White and the Zach Moss guys that we've been talking about all season. So we're really advocating like the hero running back strategy in Dynasty right now, rather than trying to load up on Rachaad White and Isaiah Pacheco and Josh Jacobs and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the optimal way to build your team. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Make sure you check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Make sure you check out her work at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.